I'm very concerned.
The recount in Arizona, that's just
which is just a garbage. They're literally looking for bamboo in the paper. That's a real fucking thing that they're doing there.
If we can prove that there's bamboo, it means that they were probably shipped from Asia, and that's how.
Yeah, and it's like, do you understand that all of the things that you are wearing or own in your house were probably also manufactured in Asia?
What up, world? And welcome back to another exquisite episode of the Ameri Podcast.
That's a new adjective.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever been. Anything I've ever done is exquisite, but I like it.
That's so not
Or
true.
high.
I believe all those trees that you've planted in the Colorado soil on the eastern slope were exquisitely planted.
Truth.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, we got another 12 in the ground on Saturday, and about 50 shrubs and flowers. So pretty good plants and gardens.
Oh.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, I'm sure your work is exquisite. Today is Monday, May 24th, 2021, and this is episode 148. We are getting ever more closer to that big 150, and we got the original crew in the house. We have in Denver tonight with us, John Anderson. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing well. It's the Stanley Cup playoffs, so I know what I'm doing with my night. Of course, after this podcast, after the podcast, everybody settle down.
Yeah. For those of you watching on YouTube, you might be able to spot a few times where John's not actually paying attention.
That's not true. I can multitask. Yeah, exactly. Oh! Toronto just scored.
Like that.
I lasted 0 seconds. Awesome. Let's do this.
Also with us out in the Denver metro area, Mr. John Kelly. How are you this evening?
Good. Very good. Yeah. Glad to be back. Listeners, hopefully you all liked our heroes versus villains bracket. Definitely let us know how you thought of that, because I actually had a lot of fun recording that one.
That revealed something interesting about, I think, our view of American history. Basically, the pivot point was Reconstruction.
Right.
Pivot.
And fuck slavery. So
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Say that twice.
Hot.
Yes, super hot.
Yeah. Like going in with the hot take, fuck slavery. Oof.
Also with us out in the West Coast, our West Coast correspondent, most of the time, Tyler Grillo. How are you?
Yeah, great. Yeah, glad to be here. I was listening to our other episode, and I think one of my favorite parts was when John low-key whispered flex when Kelly mentioned his degree in history. Really loved that. That was a great moment. Yeah, it was great. Or maybe Blake. Someone did. Maybe me. I don't know. I don't remember doing it. Someone did. I thought it was you, but
It was somebody. I don't remember who it was, but I left it in. I did have to reduce. It was like, you know how some people just aren't capable of whispering softly? I was talking about this with my mother the other day.
That's probably
It was like the loudest whisper ever, so I had to
I wonder
tone
who
it
that
down.
could be.
yeah. Let's be real.
I didn't hear that, but I'm glad someone called me out on it. Braggadocious of me to mention that.
I mean, sometimes you got to lay it down. Sometimes you could be like, look, I have trading in this.
I mean, it was very appropriate, and that was the context of it, was we needed that moment of the expert historian to come in on the scene, so it was quite appropriate. But tonight, you might get a little bit more of that. We're going to talk about just some current events, grab bag of what's going on in the world. There's been a lot of disturbing and unfortunate things, again, that have happened. So we're going to talk about those, sprinkle it in with some beautiful things, and then maybe let you know what we really think is bullshit in the world right now today. So
That should just be the name of the podcast.
What is bullshit? What is bullshit in the world?
Stop on by. It's bullshit corner again. Check it.
So I think the most obvious piece of news in the last week or two is probably the conflict that's escalated. Can't say that it's new between in the Middle East with Israel and
You might call this
Palestine.
a flare up in an ongoing chronic condition.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. Flare up.
Yeah. And, depending on your news source, you might hear that Hamas started to launch a bunch of missiles, and that's why Israel retaliated. But what was happening, and again, there are many things ongoing, but the thing that led them to launch all of those missiles was that there are these right-wing organizations, or I don't know if they call them organizations, but like right-wing Israeli people who are, and I think that they are organized in some sense, so I'm just not familiar with their organizations, who are targeting specific buildings in East Jerusalem, which is the Palestinian side. If you're familiar with like the Berlin situation, there's also like East and West Jerusalem. And in the eastern part of Jerusalem, which is supposed to be Palestine's part, they're targeting these buildings and they're going in and using some old claims to those that before those lines were drawn in the back and forth as Israel has attempted to further colonize East Jerusalem. They're using some old, I'm not totally familiar with all the cases, but like 1920s or 1940s, some like deeds or something which were also just like also just like land that was taken from the Palestinians originally, but they're trying to basically claim that these legal things give them ownership of these buildings and are like having the Palestinians who live there, the families who have lived there, some of them for multiple generations, removed from their houses. So that was working its way through the courts.
Literally, like the cops show up, and if you don't comply, they will kick you out of your house that you've had for generations. And the Israeli government is calling it a quote real estate dispute, and that, I think, Tyler, is what you're referring to as well, which is like, I mean, I guess like in the way we use language, technically true, but everybody knows the context is like, 2,000 years old, and so we should like be understanding of the context in this. And so that is the spark that lit the well prepared tinderbox that is Israel Palestine that we saw recently.
Yeah, and all this is happening in the backdrop of colonization. This is the one of the most obvious forms of modern day colonial projects that is happening. The ongoing colonization of Palestine by Israel. Netanyahu is like totally complicit in all of this, and like he's definitely on the side of continuing this colonization.
Yeah, he's a major part of his party platform is tough on Palestine. Yeah, that's like part of the reason that he continues to get reelected.
Well, yeah, and it's right. Israel is also in the middle of a gigantic shit show with trying to form a government. They've tried and failed 4 times over the last, I think, year to form a government, and it is from my rudimentary understanding of the politics, it is a problem with Bibi Netanyahu. It is if it was replacement level right wing Israeli leader, the right wing would have no problem forming a coalition. But Bibi is extremely controversial. He also, by the way, was indicted, I believe, on some shit. So like, it's a real mess. And then this is partly there is no Israeli leadership that is able to step in. So one of the things that's been this is not totally unusual, and even when there's not conflict happening, there's still some rockets going on. But one of the things that was particularly unusual about this recent flare up was that there was like basically street violence between unorganized Israelis and Palestinians. And that is unusual. And I think particularly concerning, especially because it shows I think a leadership vacuum on both sides, and a gigantic mess of a situation doesn't get solved without really strong leadership on both sides. If we don't have that, there's no way we're solving this, we're going to descend into chaos. So it is.
Tinderbox is the right word because it could explode at any second. And I mean, you look at it, and you're right, John. It's a 2,000-year problem, exacerbated by what happened after World War II. And the fact is that in the last 25 years, Israel has systematically cut off communities from each other, cut off areas of Palestine from each other, and have basically used the guise of Hamas as a bad political actor to do whatever they want.
The West Bank is still under a blockade.
Yeah, and I mean, anybody who cares about humanitarianism at all can see that it's a huge crisis. Those communities are underfunded, they're undersupported, and the Israelis want to keep it that way. Now, both sides aren't innocent in this, but man, if you care at all about humanitarianism, you got to take a step back and go, there needs to be a pump on the brakes, and these people need help,
Right.
more than anything. And it's more important than like a couple of deeds that you have to make sure that you have another street that you can claim for Israel over Palestine, right?
Well, at some point, somebody's got to come in and slap Netanyahu on the wrist, right? Like,
well, but who is that, right? Like, that's
else?
the UN or the Israeli people, neither of which are, willing or able to act. So, or it's the United States, maybe. But Biden is,
but it doesn't look like Biden's gonna do that.
I find this very difficult. I think that this is one of the situations where everybody's right and there are no heroes. Like, it is especially when you hear, like Israelis being like, have you heard of the Holocaust? Like, we were almost extinct as a culture. And it is important that we have a state. And it's like, I totally agree with you. And then Palestinians are like, yeah, and those people stole our state. And you're like, I agree with you too. And so I think it is like one of the things I found myself going back and exploring a little bit this week was Obama's speech after he got his Nobel Peace Prize, because he gave a defense of war in receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. And so I think that there is some contradictions that are important that we acknowledge in all of this. And I think like the bottom line for this recent engagement for me is that it is terrible that there is conflict. Both sides have legitimate reasons for being upset. But the thing that we really need to acknowledge right now is that Israel has significantly more dangerous and lethal military options. And so they do not respond proportionately when these things happen. And so when there's a flare up, you have a dozen Israelis who are killed and 500 Palestinians who are killed. And that is unjust, even in a very unjust context.
I mean, yeah, didn't they assassinate many of Hamas's military leaders?
Well, they went after him, but they also there's a euphemism in Israeli defense forces when these types of actions happen, which is like mowing the grass. And so when they get into a conflict like this, they try and take out as many targets as possible. They took out the building that houses Al Jazeera, which is not acceptable. They took out hospitals, including the only COVID
likely daycare centers.
Yeah, they took out schools. Like, these things are not okay / maybe war crimes. And so, like,
how is that trimming the grass?
Because they're in a perpetual state of conflict, and they're only able to really act over certain periods of time every several years. And so they build up these target lists. Finally, there's a boil over, and they can chop off as many of those target lists.
I would argue that your effort to cut the grass, you accidentally cut the roses being like the children in the hospital.
Right. I mean, like, yeah, these people are not. I'm not going to speak for these people, and you should.
It's a bad grass cutting job, basically. If that guy was cutting my grass at my house, he'd be fired. Like, you just cut my roses off.
Yeah. I'm going to take a little bit of a harder stance here. perhaps, and some others, just to get my piece. I mean, so first of all, yeah, totally, like the disproportionate response. There was, I think, a little over 200 Palestinians killed, 66 of which were children, and there were 12 Israelis killed, right, in this most recent conflict. I actually don't think this is one of those controversial, the don't at me conversations we've had of political things. I actually don't think Jewish people should have their own state. I actually don't think anybody should have a state based on ethnicity. If you look at world history, that has always ended poorly, always. And to anyone who supports the Israeli state based on the fact that there should be a Jewish state, then I ask you, do you think Kurds should have a state? Because then we should take part of Iraq, part of Iran, and Turkey and give them their own state, because they're now the largest ethnic group that does not have a state. And so if you believe in that, then you should actually...
happens with the Uyghurs in China.
Right, exactly. If you believe, actually, then you should support the Kurds, who are the current movement for a Kurdish state, which is actually an anarchist feminist state. So you should actually be supporting that if you believe, because that's what they want to do. So if you actually believe in that, then you should support that movement.
So I think,
however,
so it also, it has, I mean, I don't think you can go, I mean, they're a state with nuclear weapons, so saying that you're just going to have them not be a state any longer is not an option. But I mean, like, it set it up for disaster. By taking away areas of the Holy Land from other people and saying this is just going to be Israel territory, especially they fought over for thousands of years. I mean,
exactly.
It's them as a bastion head against a lot of the other Arab world.
We're at where we're at right now. We can't, like, it doesn't make sense to say, like, well, never mind, now you just don't have the state. Like, that's not a solution anymore,
withdraw,
right? Like, it exists. So what you have to build now is a multi-ethnic society. You have to build a multi-ethnic, a multicultural society, right? And that is not what is happening, right? Like, it is this continuation of the colonial project. And the two-state thing becomes really complex because there was an offer of a two-state back when they still thought that they were going to be able to kick the Jewish people out and get rid of the Israeli state. They rejected it, right? That didn't go so well, and so now that offer's like really not so much on the table anymore, because Israel has been able to establish itself so strongly, and yes, it has nuclear weapons and it's backed by the United States, right? So this all gets super, super complicated. But I think the thing to keep in mind is, like, what you were saying, just the disproportionate. And the thing that I just want to state finally is that I think that how we talk about it in the United States, given that the United States supplies so much military and other aid to Israel, is really important. And I think the thing that I don't hear as publicly said is enough that needs to be is that Israel is an apartheid state, because that's what it is, right? It is an apartheid state. And I think we have to start talking about it that way so that it gets more understood in the general context that this is like talking about South Africa in the 90s. Right, like this is that same narrative, and we need to start not the same narrative, but it's a similar narrative in terms of the discrepancy of how these different people are being treated by the same government. And so, I just feel like calling it an apartheid state is important in the way we talk about it to shift the narrative in the United States.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, go ahead, John.
Real quick, because I don't want this to go unanswered because we get yelled at. I think I disagree with you a lot about there shouldn't be states based on ethnicities. And, like, I don't know if you could even argue that Israel is a state based on an ethnicity. I think it's more a religion and culture, but, like, I take your point. I think that, I am for a Kurdish state. And I think there's historic reasons to have a Kurdish state. But I get that also you're going to be taking stuff away from other people. I think because we do not have time for this debate because it's so complicated and long. But I think just to
another podcast. But go ahead.
This is another podcast series. But I think, like, to put it most succinctly, I think that states are the entity of power that we currently hold as a species. It is not like necessarily just, but it is what it is. And so to have a culture group of people that do not have some kind of state, especially when put into historical context, I think it is legitimate and reasonable to expect that that groups like the Jews or groups like the Kurds could have a state all for themselves, to have kind of a bastion in our complex global ecosystem. But, like, that is a super long debate, and I'm not exactly that's not articulated as best as I wanted it to, but I'm like, trying to articulate that off the top of my head. But that's my reaction there, especially put in the historical context.
Bullet notes for Are They Real conversation. For me, it's all about borders. Because it's when you say like these are the lines, that's where it happens, right? Like it makes sense. Humans have always organized and created cultures together, right? And like the modern manifestation of that is nation states. But it's when you start to say like look at Pakistan and India, right? It's when you start to draw lines of who are supposed to be on which side that starts to create violence. So if you can have open borders, right?
Totally.
I'd be down for that.
I mean, the solution here is a strong UN in my mind.
Right.
That is able to like enforce the defense of cultures, but obviously that comes with a whole lot of issues as well. And this is not the podcast we intended, so we can have this debate later.
The boycott, divest, sanction, the BDS movement is important. Like we, as Americans, I think there's a responsibility to put pressure on our politicians around this, because all politicians, regardless of, I mean, not all, but all like in the major Republican or Democratic figures, have been large supporters. That's starting to change with the gang of three and all of that. But
it's honestly too bad that in this country, and I think what you see, there's not a lot of movement on the Palestine-Israeli attitude with a lot of people in power here in this country, because there's such a strong right-wing pro-Israel force in this country.
I do think that's changing generationally, though.
I think it is too, and I think that is changing a lot of conflicts, how we view a lot of conflicts nationwide. But there's still a stigma, I think, that's associated with that particular conflict, where any question of the Israeli government ends up being seen as almost anti-Semitic in a way.
Totally,
right?
Yeah,
and that goes back to Tyler's point, is that when you have a nation state that's only set up around one specific thing, which is Judaism.
Yeah,
that's what you're going to get, unfortunately, because the state no longer then is anything else besides a manifestation of that religion.
Totally. Well, look at U.S. history. Puritans were being persecuted in fucking England, so they came over here and then started colonizing and fucking shit up, right? And started trying to, it's like we have seen this before. It's not like this has not happened before. But now that I have taken up more than half of our time with the thing that I wanted to talk about today,
I was just going to say we should just do Israel Palestine and just.
I mean, we could just get going, but there's more other things that have also happened in the world. Interesting. Yeah.
Jim Crow 2.0.
Yeah.
Is that on your list, John? I assume there was like 5 or 7 points we're going to be.
I have Liz Cheney, the January 6th Commission, the For the People Act / Jim Crow 2.0. So like around that, around like the issue of democracy, I would say I have 3 of my now 8 things, because I added Israel Palestine because I was embarrassed it wasn't on my list.
As you should be. You fucking man. I mean, let's talk about voting shit.
It's okay. And it's also okay that we took that long, because it's important, and we
there's so much more. It's not either.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever read the science fiction books that are called something states? God, I can't remember it. But basically the idea is that it's a globalized government like 150 years from now, where the entire world is one giant democracy, and every 30,000 people is another like county in the entire world. And so, and it's all open borders. You're allowed to move in between, right? But there you get, 30,000 person pockets where you have like super heavy religious people, and you'll have super environmentalists, and you'll have like all like super warlike people, like, and you're allowed to kind of move. It's very fascinating.
Let's go, baby.
Yeah, I know. Look,
this is a whole other podcast, but I think that's essentially inevitable unless we blow ourselves up.
Yeah, we have. The way that the internet connects us and travels so quick now,
and the history of literally our entire species points in that direction. Like, I think that there are two races. There's a race between two fundamental things happening right now with our species: our ability to blow ourselves up and our connectivity and our ability to get off the planet. And whichever one of those wins determines whether we, continue as a species.
Right down topics for episode 150. Let's go.
Yeah, and a third, which is just complete biome collapse, but that probably forces our hands in blowing.
That counts into the like we'll blow ourselves up. Yeah, that totally counts into that. Like, basically, are we going to destroy ourselves or are we going to get off the planet? Those are the two things that are happening right now. I got from Amicio Michio Kaku book too.
Yeah. Shout out, listeners. You have never read Michio Kaku, go read Michio Kaku.
You should, or just pick a random Discovery Channel or History Channel show, and he's probably on it.
It's about microparticles and physics.
So voting is important. Also,
Turns out.
Democracy. We like that. There's been, I think, over 400 bills introduced in state legislators to reduce voting. There's a bunch of people who are now running for state election officials who do not believe that Joe Biden is the legitimately elected president of the United States. I'm starting to feel like we are fucking boned, and I'm very concerned.
The recount in Arizona, that's just
which is just a garbage. They're literally looking for bamboo in the paper. That's a real fucking thing that they're doing there.
If we can prove that there's bamboo, it means that they were probably shipped from Asia, and that's how.
Yeah, and it's like, do you understand that all of the things that you are wearing or own in your house were probably also manufactured in Asia? But that's another thing. So yeah, this is. I think it is better odds than not that if we have a Republican Congress in 2024, they refuse to certify any Democratic winner. Just because.
Yeah. I mean, we can see where their intentions are shifting at this point. You know, when you sent that little tweet today that showed the Republicans running for Secretary of State, and it just so happened to be that all those Republicans also didn't approve or vote for the certification of the vote. It's just really disturbing. You know?
Yeah, we're in a whole heap of trouble. So
I mean, you have an entire party that, believe Trump's big lie. And whether or not they believed it or not, they continue to support it because it underlines their message, and it keeps their base excited, keeps their base informed.
And that's why Liz Cheney was removed from leadership. It was because it wasn't even that she believed that the big lie is bullshit, because a lot of them believe that the big lie is bullshit, but she refused to shut up about it. And that's why she was, and also just to shit on her a little bit, because I personally have been praising her too much. She is not a fan of voter rights. Like she waffled super hard on a question from Jonathan Swan in a good interview recently about voting rights. So it's like, thank you for defending American democracy in this one particular instance. Appreciate it. But like, let's make this a greater principle. And again, America is better when people vote. Like, we're more prosperous, we're safer. It makes practical sense that we support democracy.
What we're seeing here is a continuation of the Republican Party as they come more and more to accept the reality that their ideology is losing, basically, right? Like their ideology is losing. And instead of doing some like deep soul searching about like, hey, like what is really at the core of our ideology? What should we actually lift up? Instead of that and doing the hard work of that, they're doubling down at the what's the word I'm trying to say? At the expense of democracy.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? I'll push back a little bit, because I actually read a really great article this week that was kind of arguing the opposite a little bit, Tyler, right? Because one thing to do is to do that work, right? To internalize what colonization meant, what white supremacy really is, right? What these types of things have done to society, try to move forward from it. But this I think it was in the Atlantic, actually, and the argument was, it's a repurposing for a lot of people that for generations didn't think that white people were like their own race. And to them, it's getting thrown in their face. And so their idealism is to do that, is to come back in and protect themselves, rather than thinking about, if we are just another race of people, right, then we all share the planet together. It's a hardening of it.
Right.
And so it's, it's always, what was interesting, it was a good argument, but it misses a point that has always been an underlying thought in the history of the United States. There's always been a hardening of white rights and white idealism throughout. But it really, if you think ahead to 2022, you think the midterms, and then again to 2024 and beyond, what you're going to see is, I think the Democrats in the House and the Senate are probably going to have enough to pass some kind of federal voting bill. And a lot of it's going to get torn down in states because you have most states Republican controlled. And they're backing these more draconian measures based off of that idea that the election was stolen when it wasn't. So you perpetuate it at the top. You don't stop people. You allow the lie to continue. It grows and grows. And you know what? We're all going to have to reap what is being sown in those states, unfortunately.
Speaking of another thing that I had on my list, fucking Joe Manchin and his goddamn nonsense about the filibuster being like, oh, wait, you mean that the Republicans weren't negotiating in good faith about the January 6th commission and now they're going to filibuster it? Who could have seen that coming?
Oh my God.
So,
anyone with half a brain could have seen that.
Literally anyone who has been following American politics since 2010, other than Joe Manchin, saw that coming. And so this is an existential moment for American democracy. I know that sounds intense, but I really believe it is true.
And I'm sorry, we've been saying it for 4 years now.
Yes. But this is like the moment we have to pass the For the People Act, because if we pass the For the People Act and it's well crafted, then we will be able to come in with the supremacy clause of the Constitution and be like, that's a cute state law you have there, but turns out we have the supremacy clause, so go to fucking hell. Yeah. And so if we're able to pass a strong For the People, a strong act for voter rights, we can make sure that this shit doesn't happen, but there's no possible way the Republicans aren't going to filibuster it. So we have to get rid of the filibuster if we're able to do this. And I swear to fucking God, if Joe Manchin ruins American democracy, it is going to be further proof that this is the dumbest of all possible timelines, because I can't believe that is the fucking final boss that we couldn't defeat was goddamn Senator Joe Manchin from goddamn West Virginia.
A centrist from West Virginia.
Yeah, it's wild. Goddamn insane. And Kristen Sinema in Arizona. It's like these two senators. So we need to pass the For the People Act is the moral of the story, because otherwise all these laws are going to go into effect and we are not going to be able to have certified elections in pivotal states in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, because there's going to be just as much pushback from Democrats if they start losing. What this does, what January 6th of this year set a dangerous precedent for, which is that if people don't get their way, they can just yell and scream about it, start a riot, attack people, and people are going to look away after a couple months. Yeah. They'll just be like, we'll just sweep it under the rug. It'll be.
Listen, people can scream and shout about it all they want. That's fine. But it's when you attempt to overthrow the government.
Kidnap a governor.
Yeah,
maybe.
Kidnap a governor. Yeah. When you start to do those sort of things, right? And I mean, I don't have time. We don't have time to go down this whole rabbit hole, but it's like the amount of mental gymnastics and things that have to be done in order to think that you're protecting. I like that they use the word like protecting our freedom more than democracy. They usually say that because freedom is just an amorphous thing that can just mean like anything that you want it to mean. And what it means is like your freedom to do whatever the fuck you want to do, which is not how actual freedom works, right?
I think it means individual power.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the time when we're talking about freedom, they're talking about individuality and individual power. I think it's a great point, John. Yeah.
Yes. I also think on positive and negative freedoms that we could get into sometime in the future. I want to say one thing. Sorry, Blake. I'll get back to you in just a second. But I saw a great tweet that was like, hey, so Republicans who believe that it was Antifa that really did that on January 6th, wouldn't you want a commission so you could prove that you're right? Like, all the people that have been like yelling about that for the last 3 months, that it was really infiltrated by leftists. Just a thought, if you want transparency.
Yeah. I've been back to the whole freedom, what it means point that you were just making, Tyler. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think like I've been trying to understand it in the ways that they understand it, and this is what I've come up with. Freedom to those people who understand it to mean that what we're talking about, right, is like, if you to think about it in science terms, to me it means like action without reaction. That's what freedom means to them, is to basically perform action without consequence. But in
it's
the
the
world,
individual power thing, right?
But that's not how the world works in like literally science and material and energy. There's always a reaction to an action. So it's just like on almost a mathematical level, what you want is physically impossible. You know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like energy is conserved, motion is conserved. We are ultimately all star stuff. Like, there's a lot of science that supports the idea that there is a one interconnected universe, whatever we want to call it. Also, there's like major world religions that also believe this. So, like, maybe we're onto something there, and American conservatives should pay a little bit more attention to the communal nature of our society, our world, and our universe.
Yeah. So it's so funny too, because a lot of them really want strong, small communities, right? A lot of them are really for that, but it's based off of Christianity. We're talking American Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because all other Christianities are weird, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I think
I shouldn't generalize, because that does throw a lot of actually really good, kind Christian people in this country under the bus. Because I'm not going to say that all Christians are evil.
And I was going to say, I think that that's changing. Like, there used to be a phrase, and this was coined by Tip O'Neill, who's a Democrat, in the 80s, all politics is local. And I think that that is flipped. I think that is wrong now. I think all politics is national. When you look at, local races, a lot of them are responding to national stories, and that's what their race is about. And so, and I think in a similar way, the Republican Party has turned away. They are in no way a small c conservative party anymore, I think, on like any level. And so, I don't know exactly where, like, I think the small community, local community thread of American thought, it now resides in the environmental movement most prominently, where they say we have to get, produce local, consume local, like that's one way to solve the climate crisis, is to have more local communities. And so, like, I think that, I say all that to say, I think our typical view of American conservatism is changing in like very
right, because the demographics are shifting. There's more people living in cities.
Well, no, but I think their ideology is changing.
If you look at rural communities, they're still very much associated with that idea of small c conservatives and local control, all that stuff.
I don't buy that anymore, I guess is what I'm saying. I think that there's enough evidence.
Big city liberal coming in, telling people in rural America.
Well, no, I mean, I look at like the all politics is national. Like, the Republican Party, the only litmus test is, do you believe Donald Trump is right or not?
Right.
That is it's not like, oh, I want the government to stay out of my local church. It's Donald Trump is the God man, and we must support the God man. Yeah. And so the Republican Party, we have to get away from understanding them as conservative, because they're just not. And I don't think that the conservative, like a genuine conservative person that really believes in genuine conservative values, which I disagree with in a lot of ways, but I have respect for, I don't think that they have a political home right now. I really don't. I don't think that the Democratic Party is a home for them. And I don't think that the Republican Party is a home for them right now. I think that they are out in the woods. And I don't even really know how many of them there are.
Let's bring them home.
I want to bring in the personal is political, which I was just looking up. Apparently that phrase was not maybe coined, but popularized.
No, all politics is local.
Well, no. But I'm bringing in.
Oh, you're bringing in another one.
Another one.
Yes.
The personal is political, which I believe was I'm reading here, was popularized in an essay by the feminist Carol Hanisch in 1970, published in 1970. Or sometimes called the private is political, but the personal is political is basically the theory that things that are, everyone is like, well, that's not political, but everything is political. It just depends on whether or not it personally impacts you, or you perceive that it personally impacts you. And so I would say that what we're seeing is, and some politicians like Donald Trump are doing this very well, where things that maybe had been perceived as not impacting people that are like more national scale or things, or that maybe have a national scale, are impacting them more personally. So like, for example, like racism, right? Like racism has existed for a really long time, but it's when politicians take and say, well, look at all these BLM people, they're going in and they're destroying property, and that could happen in your town. Now all of a sudden, right, it becomes more of an issue to people in rural areas, even though they maybe have very low populations of Black people in their communities, right? It's when when things start. So I think that the age of social media and all this has amplified this, because people are seeing and getting so much more information that they have in the past, that a lot of things are becoming personal that were not considered personal. And so I think this ratcheting up that you're speaking to, John, is that things at the national level are becoming more personal for people because of the access and the amount people are seeing them.
I don't think people are wrong in a lot of ways in perceiving, like, I think it's an and. I don't think it's a local or national, but it's now the local and the national matter to your person. Yeah. And I think people, like, I just want to say, I don't think people are delusional. I think they're making rational choices when they are nationalizing events or whatever, because that's just kind of how our society functions now. A lot of it is because of the internet, and that's a 10-year-old, 15-year-old phenomenon at this point, right? Like, I saw a crazy ass video on Twitter this weekend of a newscast, and they were discussing the internet 27 years ago. Cool. And they didn't know what to call the @ symbol. They were like, oh, you know, the A with the, like, the circle around it. I said @ and then it was on like a gun violence thing, and so the email was like violence at NBC. And yeah, and when they read the email, it was like violence at .us.nbc.com, and they didn't read any of the dots when they actually like read it out loud. Wow. And then they're literally asking their producers like, what is the internet actually? And it's like, it is so fucking wild especially if you take a step back and think about it.
Within our lifetime.
How much? Within our lifetime. Our society is completely fucking changed. And this is not necessarily a new phenomenon within the last couple hundred years. We went from discovering how to fly, which humanity has been trying to do since before we could write, probably, right? And we went from flying in North Carolina to the moon in like 50 years.
Yeah. I mean, we live in an entirely different thing. And honestly, we don't know all the long-term effects. We have no idea how it's going to play out, really. Yeah. The sociology behind it of just constant interaction, constant connection is something that we've never had as a species.
The singularity, baby.
And who knows? It's going to get wild.
So this is why our politics are so fucking wild. One of the reasons why.
Hold on to your butts.
Now, hold on to your butts. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of other topics we could discuss here.
Well, can I share one on my list that felt relevant to the trajectory?
I want to mention mine.
That we're on
I want to mention
podcast?
one of mine too, but yeah.
It might be the same. Fucking aliens. Aliens are real, and like we have acknowledged them, and they're a thing, and like, and nobody cares. Nobody fucking cares.
Probably by the next time we put out a podcast, everybody, the fucking thing that, listen, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Trump, did that whole thing where they have to like fucking say, they have to basically come forward and tell us June 1st. That's when they have to release all that shit. It's just a few days, friends.
It's motherfucking aliens and shit, man.
Disclosure's happening.
Also, did you see this shit? It's a sideline on aliens. They this is like not super new, but like I think it was somewhere in Mexico, so probably Mayan. They they were going through all these relics or whatever that they had found whatever, a tomb. I don't remember. It was a tomb or they uncovered like a dwelling or whatever. And as they're going, they found these little tiny. They found like a bunch of them. There's like multiple of them. These little small gold trinkets, and they don't know what they are, but they kind of look like planes.
Let's go, baby.
Serious?
Let's go.
I'm sorry. Is that supposed to prove? Is that supposed to prove that there's aliens?
Or that there's like there was a time warp shit happening, or there was like a time warp shit happening and they saw airplanes, because they kind of look more like planes than UFOs.
Or maybe there are fundamental physics to being able to fly.
But you got to look at them because they looks like there's a cockpit, and the way that they're designed is like, yes, if it was just like a thing that flies, yes, but if you look at how it looks like a plane.
Another fun fact about that region, the Olmecs are considered to be the ones who discovered chocolate and drinking and eating chocolate. And speaking of no borders, they were more of a nomadic culture in that part of America, and they eventually were absorbed into the Mayan culture. So, maybe we can just
globalization, baby.
Full circle there. On that note, hey, thanks.
I mean,
everybody.
it is. Yeah.
Blake, what did you want to bring in?
Well, I feel like we should end it there, but I did want to mention the fact that I didn't know this, but apparently back when William Barr was defending Trump, he sent a redacted memo in as like defense to not charge Trump in 2019.
Oh, and that's getting
that is like blowing up right now. A judge just a few weeks ago,
I think they have to release it, don't they?
Yeah, rejected the Justice Department's attempts to keep it secret. So that should be getting released soon. It'll be nice to see what Barr's lame ass excuse was.
Trying to overturn American democracy to preserve the prerogatives of the executive. Probably.
Trump showed me his balls one time, and I was like, "Those are ginger goodness. Please let me write this memo for you."
That's a more likely. I have one more actual serious thing to mention. Also, is the Belarusian journalist / dissident that Belarus forced a commercial airline to land, and then they fucking kidnapped this guy. And there should be some goddamn consequences to Belarus. This is where the UN needs to step up. The EU needs to step up. The United States needs to step up. Like, we need to do some shit.
Wasn't there already sanctions?
Yeah. So the EU announced that no member airline will be flying in Belarus. They'll be avoiding Belarusian airspace, I believe. The U.S. should follow suit. There should be serious consequences for this. The international norms that were established after World War II are extremely important to the world connectivity, to world economy.
Balance.
The world that we have been able to build over the last 70 years is in part because commercial airlines are left alone and all that kind of shit. And so we need to heavily enforce these things, and Belarus needs to face some fucking consequences. And maybe we just throw some shit on Russia, because I have no doubt Russia was a part of this. And so let's fucking go. Let's defend some international norms. Let's go. International norms. Godspeed, everybody.
Just get to the end.
I didn't know if we were gonna end on international norms or aliens, because like it's close for us. It's close, Like I feel like that's usually
they're equally popular on this podcast.
Yeah, it's true.